Welcome to the BodPod, the podcast where everybody is welcome. I'm your host, Rachel K. Grimm, and each week we welcome old and new friends to talk all things body image, self-love, and confidence. This is the BodPod. Hey BodPod squad, I'm Rachel K. Grimm, the confidence coach behind Ditch the Click and your BodPod host. Every week from my cute Brooklyn apartment, I'm bringing you confidence-boosting conversations with some of your favorites in the space. And today I truly have a BodCon favorite, author, podcaster, fat activist, Virgie Tovar. Hey Virgie!
Hi.
I'm so excited you're here.
I'm excited to be here.
If you've been following along with us on social media, for those who are listening, you know that Virgie is going to be at BodCon 2023, happening March 5th. It's so soon.
Yeah.
You're on a great panel too. I'm thrilled.
I'm thrilled.
Yeah. I love that you're going to be a part of BodCon. Can't wait to see you there. Can't wait to see everyone listening there. But I'm really excited to get to dive in one-on-one with you today because I think we can go even deeper and really cue up the conversation for BodCon, right? Listening to this today, we get a little extra behind the scenes of who Virgie is. So then when you get to have that conversation on stage at the BodCon, it kind of brings it full circle, you know?
Absolutely, yes.
So I first want to dive into your title. I think that could be a good place to start for anyone listening who isn't familiar with you. Like I said, you're a fan fave, so I think that a lot of people listening probably are familiar with you. But for those who don't, I want to dive into your title. So as I was prepping for this episode, figuring out how am I going to introduce Virgie, because you do so many great things. What is the title I use, right? I heard the term fat activist being used to define you, right? That you've coined that for yourself and your community calls you that. And I found it so interesting for two reasons. One, because it is the word fat we know is something that can be so polarizing for people, right? It's either something that you embrace it or you almost like kind of if you're watching us on YouTube right now, you like see me cringing. I know, Virgie, the response that I'm speaking of to that word. But also because that's not a title we typically hear, right? We hear like head marketer or doctor or teacher or whatever, fat activist. So I want to talk about the term in general, but I also want to talk about or want you to take us back to the moment when you were like, yeah, I am a fat activist. Like this is what I do. This is what I stand for. Like this is the story that I want to tell and share with my community. I feel like that could be a really great way to kick off who you are and what you do.
Yeah, I love that question. I mean, on the one hand, right, you've got the reality, and this is true of any identity, any political movement, right? You've actually got thousands of different definitions within it, right? Like think about the word feminist and how if you like lined up 100 Americans or people who live in North America and ask them to define what a feminist is, they would all have very different definitions. So I think it's important to start with like, I have this kind of North Star definition in my mind, but it's not everyone's. Like I kind of want to like start there, right? Like I think that there's something really challenging and also really juicy, I guess, like about the fact that in that same way fat activism can look different for different people. And so, but let me go back in time, right? I kind of want to give a little bit of a history lesson and then kind of like situate myself within that history.
Perfect. Let's hear it. Go, girl.
Like, I mean, kind of like the genesis date of fat activism in the United States is considered to be like 1969, which was when there was this thing called a fat in Central Park. Yeah, so there was like the first gathering of people in larger bodies in Central Park, and they were burning diet books and they were carrying signs that said things like fat is fine. I love being fat, and so it was like this incredible kind of political moment of, public fatness, right? And I think there's
Yes.
something really powerful about that. Not like, right, because just being in public space as a fat person is really fraught and complex. And then being in a space with multiple fat people is even more so, right? Because like we've been taught to hide and be invisible. And then we've also been taught to never be around each other because we draw
Yes.
attention in the same way that a lot of marginalized communities have been like taught to like just stay away from like that person, stay away from like the person who causes waves in your same community.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of kicked off a lot of different things. Like it started basically like um, NAFA, the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance, emerges very quickly thereafter. And then very soon after that, something called the Fat Underground emerges, which is like this kind of more radical, kind of feminist, kind of queer version
Yeah.
of fat acceptance, right? Which kind of turns into like fat liberation.
Yes.
So it's intersectional, right? Because all of a sudden it's like, well, this is what I love about it, right? It kind of went from like a movement that was really focused on acceptance along the one line of like weight. And then I think once it became kind of a little more radical and like there were feminist issues, there were queer issues kind of coming into the mix, all of a sudden it's like, well, if I'm being accepted because I'm fat, but I'm not being accepted because I'm a woman, or I'm not being accepted because I'm queer, like
Yes.
how useful is this movement to me?
Yes.
So it kind of very early on, you see these questions beginning to emerge.
Yeah.
Is this a single issue politic? Is this a multiple issue? Is it an intersectional politic, right? These are questions that still abide to this day. So years pass, right? Like kind of, the movement kind of morphs. There's still this sort of like the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance going on, and that still exists to this day. And then you've got kind of this more like rowdy, sort of salty,
Yeah.
sort of spicy, like more radical version of the fat activism movement or the fat sort of like the fat movement. And so this goes on like the 90s, we start to see like zines coming out about it. And then of
Yes.
course, like a lot of zines, there's like this evolution into like Tumblr
Yeah.
and live journals, right? So like you kind of like you can kind of see almost like 90s zines, and then like the early 2000s you start to get into the internet, and it's
Yeah.
like early social media. So people are like posting pictures of them. Mostly it's like plus size queer women
Mhm.
posting images of their outfits,
Mhm.
and then loving on each other on these
Yeah.
various like tumblers and different kinds of like blogs, right? And what's amazing about, I kind of want to like, I mean, I know I'm giving like a lot of runway into my own identity, but I think it's
No, we love it.
useful.
This is a great a great history lesson too. Honestly, like I'm even learning things from you in this moment. So keep going. Tell us.
Yes. So what I kind of want to call on is that, right, this is a group of, again, mostly queer women who are very scrappy. They're
Yeah.
thrifters, they are deal finders, and they are seamstresses. Like
Mhm.
they're like kind of like, they have to learn the skills
Yeah.
to adapt clothing that wasn't made for them to
Yeah.
become clothing that is. And
Yes.
right, like, because think back to 2000, like we've got this huge proliferation of plus size fashion right now, but
Mhm.
in 2000, and I think back before 5 years ago, there
Yeah.
was really nothing.
Yeah.
And the styles that were available were often dowdy, they were not colorful, they were often about kind of hiding the body,
Mhm.
and they weren't about like showing up and being visible. And these women were really not interested in that.
Yeah.
So they would thrift, and they loved vintage, like all this kind of stuff, right? So they're like teaching each other how to alter garments. They're teaching each other how to accessorize. They're teaching each other how to like maybe take a basic top that isn't very fun and turn it into something, turn it into a crop top, add
Yeah.
some sparkles to it, or like add buttons, or like, really kind of like about being visible and celebrating your body. And so this was like the very early, this was kind of the version of the fat movement that I, about 10 years later, would enter. So,
Love
so all of this, like from 1969, fast forward to 2010, which is when I'm introduced to fat activism.
Yeah.
I'm in graduate school. I'm researching how weight discrimination impacts gender.
Wow.
I'm really interested, and this comes from as a child, I had a ton of gender confusion because I knew I was a girl, but I got a lot of signaling that I was masculine. So
Yeah.
I was treated like I was, I was bigger than everyone else. So I was considered to be stronger. I wasn't considered to be delicate. The boys in my class treated me kind of more like a boy. I couldn't find clothing in the girl section. So that felt very confusing. There were a lot of like the social sides of gender that I wasn't getting. Like I would throw the ball and I wouldn't get the ball thrown back. That's kind of like the social side of our identities, right? And so I felt a lot of gender confusion. I was curious if this was a phenomenon that was like potentially widespread among plus size women. And I was finding that the answer was yes. But as part of like the research of getting ready to do all that work, was learning about what was out there, reading the books, reading the articles, and I ended up at a fat activism conference just by hearsay. Somebody was like, "Have you ever heard of this thing? It's happening in like 2 weeks. You got to go." It was in Oakland, California. It was a
Okay.
conference called No Lose, and it was a queer gathering of fat positive people. And I like had no idea what I was about to step into.
Yeah.
So anyway, like it was like people I was immediately immersed in this culture of people who were refusing to diet, who were honoring and worshiping and talking about how beautiful fat bodies were, who were living these extraordinary electric lives. They were fashionable, they were polyamorous, they were interesting, right? Like they had all the things that I had been told that you don't get to be unless you're thin,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they were all of it, and they were the same size as me, and they were bigger than me, right, too, as well. So so it was just so powerful. So like so at that time, right, basically if you were a fat person who didn't hate being a fat person and weren't dieting, you were basically a fat activist. Like I think like in that it's kind of like a, I mean, now at this point, I do see, to me, fat activism also means educating and advocating for the end of weight discrimination.
Yes.
Um, but I think it's a lot more than that too. It's like kind of like it really is to me, it's like this lifestyle thing. So I love that title. And that's kind of, yeah, that's where that comes from.
First of all, I love that storytelling that you put behind the title. Truly, like I said, gave us a history lesson in the best way, because I know if I'm learning something, there's so much that someone else listening or watching just learned too. And it's amazing to see, you know, why don't we learn about that in history class? Like, come on, like those are how empowering to know that that is something that has been going on since the 60s, you said, and has like, I love the way you queued it up for yourself. You're like, and 2010 I enter, right? But it had been going on for so long. And I love that you shared about the conference you went to, because who knew that that existed? And I'm sure at the time too, finding something like that to exist was probably like, wow, I feel so seen and validated and also just empowered, because when you see people who are like you and who are loving life as existing in a similar body to you, it really gives you back that power and gives you the power to be like, yeah, I am a fat activist, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, I mean, I remember like seeing these people and just sort of like they're like electric personalities, they're electric energies, and just being like, oh my God, I don't have to diet anymore. I don't, like, it just felt like so relieving. Like, because I was
Yeah.
like, all I want is dignity. All I want is
Yes.
access to love, access to things that I like, access to clothing I want to wear, right? Like I'm doing all of this stuff with the idea that someday if I like torture and starve myself enough that I can become that person.
Yeah.
And just they kind of, it really was like it felt like the genie was out of the bottle. And I really remember
Yes.
even in that first weekend, knowing in my body, I was like, oh wow, these folks, I don't know if they know, but they're about to change the course of history. Like it was nuts. I feel chills now even talking about it. Like I
Me too.
knew that I was like, because even for like, and I want to contextualize and say, not even like the fat activism, like the fact that you could like love being fat or accept your body as a fat body. It was the piece around not having to diet, the
Yes.
piece around not having to restrict food, even if you were in a larger body. And
Yeah.
I was like, and mind you, right, because they were that weekend, they asked me questions I had never been asked before. Did you know that you don't have to diet? No. I mean, I was like 30 years old. I had been a feminist for 10 years at that point. I had been an anti-racist for 12 years at that point. I had been like a person who had been a critical thinker from the age of 18, right? Like the minute I entered college, I was immediately drawn to political movements and critical thinking. And I was involved in those movements. And, and I'm like an educated feminist, anti-racist, like whatever critical thinker person. And no, it had never occurred to me. And so I was like, this question, like once this question is in the cultural zeitgeist, it will change the culture. Because if I don't know, then no one knows. You know what I mean?
Yes. I talk a lot about when I'm coaching someone, I talk a lot about how confidence is not just achieved when you become what you think you have to become, right? But confidence is like meant to be achieved right here, right now, exactly as you are. And I think something that we're told in the body space, in the fat space, is like, oh, once you become this, right? Like once you do this diet and you lose weight or you become this size, oh, then you can be happy with your life. Then you can be confident. But that's not the case. It's meant to be like radical self-acceptance right here, right now. And that's where like confidence comes from, right? And I love that you hit on that someone said to you, do you know you don't have to diet? Because to me, that's almost saying, do you know you can love yourself right now? Do you know that you don't have to change in order to accept who you are, right? And find joy in your life?
Yes. Yeah. And I think that specifically like understanding, I think for me, it was like there was a lot involved in dieting, which I now realize was an eating disorder. I mean, I called it
Sure.
dieting.
Yeah.
But I had this eating disorder, and I think that there was this sense that the suffering that went alongside it was something that I deserved
Mm.
because I was fat and because being fat made me bad.
Yeah.
And I think like, and I think about all the food, right? Like how I used to be at the grocery store. I didn't let myself go down half of the aisles in the grocery store. And it was really about like that subhumanity, right? It was like this sense that like I don't deserve to enjoy dessert. I don't deserve to have like a tiramisu. I don't deserve to have peanut butter.
Yeah.
I don't, you know what I mean? Like it just was like, it
Yeah.
was like this real sense of like someday when you're the right kind of person, you will be the kind of person who gets to enjoy butter.
Yep.
But you are not that person today, and you will not be that person for a long time, which
Yeah.
is so dehumanizing, in fact,
Yeah. The things that we, the joy, the happiness that we keep ourselves from because we think that, oh, well, once we become this, then we can enjoy the peanut butter or have the butter, right? But it doesn't have to be when I do this, I can then be rewarded with this. It's like, no, I am deserving of that right now, today.
Yes, 100%.
I want to take it back a little bit when you were telling us your history lesson, when you were sharing about going to that conference. You used a few words a few times. You used the word invisible and hide a few times. And I know as someone who has been on a body confidence journey myself, right? I always like to refer to it as a journey because I think it's always ongoing. On that body confidence journey, I know that I've seen myself at points of wanting to hide and be invisible. And I don't know that I always knew that's what it was. I often think back to a time where all I wore was black, which if you're watching us right now on our YouTube channel, you'll see I'm wearing the furthest thing from black. I'm wearing like the most bright, bold colors. And that's truly my closet is bright, bold colors too. Don't get me wrong. I'm a New Yorker, so I have a lot of black. I think black is like fun and chic and sexy and cool. But I used to lie to myself and tell myself, oh, Rachel, you're wearing black all the time because it's fun and chic and sexy and cool. When in reality, I was trying to minimize myself by wearing black, right? Blending in, not showing up. And it took my journey of developing confidence and discovering that for myself to realize, no, I don't have to hide. I don't have to be invisible. I don't have to blend in, right? I can stand out. And I think that, first of all, you, again, anyone who's watching can see that you're wearing like the most funky top. I know following you on socials, any media you've done, you're always wearing fun, beautiful colors. And I think often in society, sadly, we are told to shrink ourselves, and we do that through clothing. So I want to talk a little bit about the, yes, self-acceptance, but maybe also the style acceptance and like hey, I don't have to minimize. I don't have to be invisible. I don't have to hide. I can be a fat woman and wear whatever I want. I can wear the colors. You referenced a lot the women in history who were really figuring out what that style looked like for them, and that they were eclectic and cool and fun. And I really want to dive into that, because I know if I have dealt with, no, I have to wear black to minimize and be invisible. I know that so many other people listening have felt that too.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I mean, I love talking about style and kind of and fashion as something that is extremely political, right? Because I think
Yes.
it really is when you're talking about, right? Because like when you think about it, it's like I think for me, when I was really drawn to, I'm like, I don't even know where to start. On the one hand, I'm like, I come from an intergenerational, I think, fashionista family, and I
Yes.
also come from an intergenerational fat family. So, yeah, for most of my life, I mean, I remember I can really relate to that feeling of looking in your closet and everything is black, dark brown, and navy.
Yeah.
And I really remember, for me, I really saw clothing as something that had the potential to protect me from abuse. And
Mm.
that comes from my earliest childhood memories, right? Like, going back in time, I think about like all the pictures of me as a baby. I'm being put in all of these amazing outfits, right? Like, I mean, there's these images of me where I'm like, I mean, like my mother almost like theme dressed me. Like I'd be one day I'd be like Jane Fonda. Like I'd have like a little sweatband and
Oh,
stuff, and I'd have like a little like a gymnastics outfit. I don't know, it was just nuts. Um, but then once I started going to school and started getting abused for being fat, um, clothing completely shifted. It became
yeah.
something that was about protecting me from that abuse. And on the one hand, right, there was no way it was going to protect me from that abuse, because there was no like garments can't really hide that you're in a larger body.
Mhm.
Um, but on the other hand, I remember days like on the rare day when someone didn't, make fun of me or like fat shame me. I remember trying to go back in my mind at the end of the day, and I tried to replicate every single thing that I did, including what I wore the next day, to
Yeah.
try and get the same outcome.
Yeah.
And so my relationship to fashion was basically very trauma informed for a lot of my life. And then I remember, and this is what's so funny, is that once I went to college, like that story of who I was when I was in high school and in my hometown, when I was in elementary school and all that, I kind of tried to like let it all go in college, and it sort of succeeded to some extent. My first 2 years, I was at a college that was more conservative, and then I transferred to UC Berkeley, which was just this like really rad, weird place full of people who were kind of outsiders on some level, or like like basically like we're really intensely critical thinkers, like we're interested in changing the culture. And so I'm surrounded by like, for the first time ever, a community of women who are like lighting me up. They're like,
Yeah.
you're amazing. We're all amazing. Like, you know, we would call each other. It was like this incredible experiment of like woman positive, sex positive community.
Yes.
I'd never had access to that before. And you know, one of the biggest things that they encouraged all of that we encourage each other to do was to wear what we wanted. And I think like I started to experiment with wearing tight clothes. And
Yes.
I think some of it was honestly, some of it was that like I had been told my whole life that I was not sexually desirable. Like nobody would want to sleep with me, no one would date me, no one would love me, and no one would marry me if I
Yep.
was fat. And
Yep.
then at 17, I start like trying to sexually experiment and
Yeah.
have a lot of success, frankly.
Yeah.
And I
Yes. What we
think,
love.
yeah, and I was like, wait. So it felt very, again, that felt really like for me, that probably was one of the biggest aha moments about the culture at large. Like
Mhm.
when I found out that I could have access to love, sex, dating, whatever I wanted, right? I'm straight, so it was like from specifically from dudes. Um, it made me question the whole culture, frankly. I was like, I believe this with all of my heart because this is all I was ever told from the age of
Mhm.
5 to 18 or 17, I guess.
Yeah.
And here I am, like experimenting, having a lot of success, feeling desirable, feeling like I can have sex when I want with
Mhm.
people I want to have sex with.
Mhm.
And I think that led to me kind of coming into a sexuality that felt kind of aggressive. Like it
Yeah.
was like I was a little bit like you like I got lied to my whole life. In fact, I am sexy. In fact,
Yes.
I am this and I really wanted to almost like tell the world. I wanted the whole world to know that like I
Yes.
am getting laid. And I
Yes.
think the way that I saw the pathway to that was through this like tight clothes. And it's
Mhm.
so interesting because like when I think back on that time, going back to the title of fat activist, even though I was still dieting, I didn't know about fat activism yet. Everyone thought that I was like politically fat because I was wearing tight clothes. So like, I go back and they're like, you were a fat activist since like you were 21. And I was like, no, girl, I wasn't. And they were like, oh, I always thought because you wore tight clothes that you were like this like fat positive person. And so I was like, well, I mean, maybe in some ways I was, but
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of it. And again, I was still hating my body at that time.
Mhm.
But it was kind of my first entry point to like, and it was fascinating, right? Because people were interpreting me as more political than I actually was because of the tight clothes, it got me into circles that in fact made me political. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yes.
I was flagging without knowing I was flagging, and it
Yes.
gave me access to stuff that actually I needed.
Yeah.
um so anyway, so like to move on now, similar to you, I look at my closet and I'm like, wow, not only is it full of clothing that fits me, because I think it's important to understand also when you're in a larger body, and I know this is something true for a lot of people, regardless of their size, their closet is full of clothes that's like aspirational. It's full
Yes.
of clothes that doesn't fit, that might
Yes.
fit in the future, or maybe fit at one point, and we need to keep them there, right? And right, like I think this speaks to kind of the way that the garment kind of becomes like I think what's so fascinating about garments is that like they are so much about society, right? Like in
Mhm.
the sense that like I remember my grandma, one of the things she taught me to do, and I come from an intergenerational fat family, and intergenerational, I mean my family is Mexican, and also all the women in my family have eating disorders. I mean they don't know it, and I
Yeah.
didn't know it for a long time. But one of the first things that my grandma who raised me taught me was that you always wear clothes that's a little bit too tight because the garment is supposed to discipline you. You know, like what if it starts to get right, like if it starts to get, I mean it's already uncomfortable, but if it starts to get very uncomfortable, you know that you need to start restricting.
Wow.
So you can kind of see how, like, and I think historically, when we think of like the history of like the corset, especially when we talk about like the trajectory of like women's fashion or traditionally women's fashion, we look at the history of like how the garment was meant to discipline your body, no
Mm-hmm.
jiggling, no fatness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I think that we're still kind of in the shadow of that. We're still
Yeah.
in that, like, we're still living in the history of that. So I think for a lot of us, I mean, a perfect example is like maybe your closet isn't full of corsets, but if your closet is full of clothes that doesn't fit you, your closet is full of corsets.
Yeah.
Like, it is meant to, like, it is meant to contain your soul and your
Yes.
desire and
Yes.
like and your future and all of that, so it's like I just think about how living in that time, and maybe it's not even the size, maybe it is the color, right? And I think of
Yeah.
that as it is a type of corsetry.
I love that you use the metaphor or the visual of the corset, because that's
Yeah.
that is a great visual. Like, it's so true, that the constricting. I think back to, I'm totally going to call my mom out here. So sorry, mom. I think about the fact that for like a majority of my life, my mom always had some item of clothing hanging on her door. And this item of clothing was always to represent the thing that she wants to fit into, the thing that she's working towards. And it was always a beautiful piece. Sometimes it was something that at one point she did fit into, right? But she doesn't any longer. And to this day, I think about that piece of clothing that hangs up there. And to me, the most liberating thing that I've ever done, one of the most liberating things I've ever done, has been to remove every single item from my closet that makes me feel like I have to fit into it or I have to change my body in some way. I do not want to feel comfortable. I'm not meant to fit my clothing. My clothing is meant to fit me. And as you said before, like, we are at a place too now where thankfully we are starting to have styles that are trendy and cool and are not just like, what did you say earlier, black, beige, and navy are like the only options, right? If you're anything beyond straight size. And so now there are more options, but just the realizing that you don't have to live for that item that's hanging on your door that you're trying to fit into, or the corsetry in your closet, is truly the most just liberating feeling. Because when you're showing up, I don't know about you, but when I show up in something I feel good in, I think I also project, talk about confidence, right? Like, definitely project more confidently, because to what your grandmother was saying about, if you're feeling a little uncomfortable in a piece of clothing that's telling you need to change something, that does not boost my confidence at all, right? That's the complete opposite.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and just kind of like the reality that discomfort actually affects your cognitive ability, right? I mean,
Yes.
I just think about how what this stuff I mean, well, if you want to, I like, really, we're such a science and data driven culture, and I'm like, this has cognitive impacts. Like, if
Yes.
you're energetically kind of like spiraling over here, it's extremely difficult to be focused. I even think about learning about the research around, what dieting does to the brain and how it makes you, like, literally, they've done tests. People who are restricting food or who are hungry make worse long-term decisions, right? And it's just because you're in survival mode. But I just
Yes.
kind of think about, like, in general, for me, like, when I think about what confidence means to me, it's very connected in my mind to the word healing.
Yeah.
And I think about, like, when I ferociously protect myself from everything that is seeking to bring toxicity into my life. When I say to myself, and I believe I deserve better than what this culture is trying to serve me up on a spoon, and I take care of myself the way that, like, I think that I have a lot of like metaphors of kind of like being your own mother. Like, when someone is a parent, their number one priority in this world is that child. They will make any kind of decision that is necessary to protect that child. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, what if I had that feeling towards myself?
Yeah.
And that's what that word means to me. But like, I love that I think a lot of us can relate to that image of your mom, that garment,
Yeah.
that garment that is meant, I mean, it really is almost like, I mean, to me, it's almost like a drill sergeant just sitting there, just reminding you, you're not worthy.
Mm-hmm.
You're not there yet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like this, it's like, so, I mean, it's such a simple, again, the garment is technically inanimate. It doesn't have a mind, it doesn't have a spirit, it doesn't have a will. And yet, because like of the social context of what it means and what it means to have a body, um, it stands in for this. It's like this silent way of communicating something. It's just really powerful.
Yeah, it like I love what you said about it's this inanimate object, but it has such control over us and control over the decisions that we make and the things that we do with our bodies. So didn't mean to call, like I said, didn't mean to call my mom out, but I think it's just such a relatable. It's so relatable, and to what we said, again, calling out my mom and your grandmother, these women who are influential women in our lives, who when we're young we look up to and we're like, oh, that's the way they operate, so that's how we operate. Truly, that restrictiveness or that control really is then is learned, you know. And I think about, I don't know, I often think about how confidence is also learned, right? That it's, yes, it can come from how you're raised, right? That can be an influence of it, but ultimately it has to be a decision. Like, just as you decide to love your body right here, right now, or accept, even if it's not love, accept your body right here, right now. Isn't that also what confidence is? And I love that you went into that confidence to you means a sense of healing. Because I talk a lot about confidence being, I've already said it on this episode, growth, right? And constantly a journey and ever changing. But it's like you almost knew I was going to ask that question, Virgie. And so it's one I ask on every episode because it is so personal, person to person. So I love that you went into that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that like, I think for a long time, I used to think of confidence as something that was a performance.
Yeah.
I think that for a long time, I mean, right, like some people say fake it till you make it, and I'm actually a believer in that. Like it's kind of, what's funny is fake it
Same.
till you make it is actually a therapeutic model. Like
Yes.
literally that's what like acceptance and commitment therapy, or like
Yes.
I guess it would be more like cognitive behavioral therapy. Like basically, like this is a therapeutic tool that
I
actual
agree.
therapists are
Yep.
out here like teaching people how to do for $200 an hour, right? So I think that there's a part of me that's like fake it till you make it is like actually a very powerful method, because
Yeah.
like, I think that it takes so many elements for us to, there's so many things that have to be in place for us to really be in a place where we can create a pathway for our own dignity and for our own worth and understanding our um, sort of unconditional worth. And so, I think for me, it really started out with being like, I feel worthless, I feel unattractive, but I'm going to keep calling me and my friends beautiful. I'm going to keep wearing clothes that I like. I'm going to keep going on dates. I'm going to keep setting boundaries with my dates, even if I don't feel like I deserve to set them. And I think that that protected me from a lot. And I think that in my mind, that was what it was kind of like, I feel like still like kind of worthless inside, but the world doesn't know it. I'm able to fool the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that from there, and just like, and that was like, I think that was such a powerful time, even though it was a complex time. It was such a powerful time. That performance was really my major preoccupation. And I think as I've aged, and like that time served to create space and people around me for the next chapter, which
Yeah.
was really kind of a deeper chapter of like dropping in and being like, again, asking that question that I mentioned earlier, which is like, what if I believed that I was actually precious, that I was actually worthy of protection, and that I was actually worthy of like doing everything in my power to protect my spirit from anyone or anything that seeks to dim it in any way. And I think
Top
now
off,
when I think,
honestly.
yeah, I mean, I just kind of think about like, it's like that, like first, I often, when I think of the word confidence, I often think of the visual of the bucket,
Mm.
and like how some people wake up and society has filled up their bucket for them. They've hit all the marks, and society snuck in at night with a little fairy and filled up your bucket. And you wake up in the morning and like society's like, yeah, yeah,
Get
yeah,
it.
and then you've got people who are marginalized, and they're that same fairy who literally took from your bucket to fill your bucket, girl.
Literally.
Um,
They came
and
into my
and so you're like, you wake up and you're like, damn, you walk out your door and everyone's like, nope, nope, nope. And so I think like for me, it's like, for some people, for a very lucky minority, confidence comes from cultural adherence. And
Mm.
for the rest of us, that bucket needs to be filled by other things. And I think like, and I think it's like finding the people and the things that are and viciously protecting the bucket, right? Viciously protecting what's in
yes.
it. And kind of like, I mean, yeah, like sort of, I think for me, it's like it really is like tending to that bucket, keeping it as full as possible, finding things that will help me fill it up more, and understanding that like chasing that sort of societal ideal is something that drains my bucket, and I just know I have to like find another pathway to the joy and the fullness that I need.
You mentioned, obviously, the amazing visual of the bucket and things that fill the bucket. I love talking about resources and tools to fill our bucket. And, we talked a lot here about community, which is obviously the BodCon is a community in itself. So thrilled for BodCon 2023 to have you there and so many others to have this communal conversation around body confidence and self-acceptance. But I want to talk about a resource, a tool that you've put out there for people to use on their
Journey as well.
So speaking of resources and tools that we look to on this journey, you have put out a resource very recently for that journey too. I want to talk about your body positive journal. I want you to kind of dive into that with us. Maybe the inspiration behind it, how it really does serve as a tool and a resource, all the things on the journal.
Yeah, I mean, so to begin with, journaling has been a huge part of my journey, with my own body confidence, my own body acceptance. Journaling is, I mean, and a lot of people have complicated feelings about journaling, so I don't want anyone to feel like, I feel like there is this weird expectation that like, if you're not a journaler, then you should be. So I don't want to put that on anybody.
I think about this a lot. My best friend, I apologize to her all the time for this. She's always been a journaler. This is like my middle school best friend. Still my bestie to this day. She's always been a journaler. And I used to be like, that's so silly. Like you and your specific pens and paper. I don't get it. Then, to what you said, on a healing journey, I began to journal. And I realized if I could have consistency in journaling, I could create a sense of consistency in my life. And to me, consistency is, making myself promises, following them through, creating confidence, right? And so the journal, as someone who is a reformed hater of journals, I want to give you the permission to please speak on it, because even that past version of me, she needs to hear it. And so I know there are other people who will get a lot of goodness out of you talking about the journal.
Yes. Okay. I love that. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, I think everybody has this really, everybody has a unique relationship and feeling about it. But for me, I found that journaling, like, I mean, journaling in general is, there's so many things that are like magical and healing about it that you wouldn't expect. So to begin with, right, like as a fat person, I never felt like I was supposed to be documented. This is why I didn't want to be in pictures and all of this stuff. For journaling became a way that I could document myself.
Yes.
And that is major. That is major for me as like a fat woman who really wanted to be invisible, who didn't want to exist for most of her life. So I think like the self-documentation piece was really, really big. The next part for me in terms of what it taught me was it helped me reconnect to patterns and cycles. So I mean, like I was able to observe. I think like if we don't have the documentation, it's really hard to see where we're stuck and where
Yeah.
we've made growth. So this is
Yeah.
a document that kind of shows us like, oh wow, that thought that was my whole life 8 years ago or in January is not my whole life anymore. And a lot of times when we're healing, we actually don't notice when we have hit these benchmarks.
Yeah.
So for me, journaling became that. I think also there's something kind of metaphorical to me about the journal in the sense that like the power of the blank page, like the power of creating yourself, the power of recreating yourself, the power of turning the page. And kind of like what journaling teaches us, these are powerful human lessons that like you can take a life where you hated yourself every single day for, you know, for so long, and you can say, today is the day I begin that journey to end this. And I think that, like, you know, every single time we turn the page, it's like that it reminds us of our potential to reset as human beings, our potential to like put out something and to try and make it happen, which I think is like really, you know, a big part of why humans exist. And specifically, right, like the journal that I created was incorporating not only, and I think, oh, the last thing I'm going to say also another big tool, which it shows up in the body positive journal, is it's a space to vent. And I love venting, and venting is so important when you're especially, I mean, at any time in life, but especially when you're trying something new. And I think kind of like, you know, having that process where it's like you can do it without shame, you can do it without censorship. Being honest with yourself is so powerful. So
Yes.
when I think about like this journal, it's kind of like all of that, like that experience that I just told you, as well as integrating all of the tools that I have used throughout like my decade and plus doing this work with other people. So it starts out like the very first, so there's an introduction that's sort of like, there's nothing wrong with you. Like you're perfectly fine exactly the way that you are. And then it goes immediately into and this was like a very strategic decision, was to have rage pages, where you can just be mad. Because that's a very common, anger is a very common emotion that comes up when we're doing this work, but it's also an emotion that we've been taught we're not supposed to express.
Yes.
So I wanted to put that right at the beginning to sort of normalize it and to lift it up, because I'm like, because right when we do this work around body confidence and body healing, body acceptance, whatever you want to call it, we are making room for our full humanity. Not we're not creating a pathway to like being one very specific idea of something. We are making room for the totality of our emotional, physical, spiritual selves.
Yeah.
And so to say, I'm gonna do body acceptance, I'm gonna do body confidence work, but I want to keep it cute. I don't want it to be messy. That's a way, I mean, again, that's bringing the corsetry back into the work. No, the whole idea is to sort of like bring it up, like throw it away. And so my thought was like with anger, I was like, anger is a very large emotion. And the other thing is, anger is one of the galvanizing emotions. It's an emotion that drives action. And so, right, like when I think about the energy of anger, it is the energy that we need to make major changes in our life.
Yeah.
And so like it's so exciting to, because I think about, like, for example, there are a lot of emotions that people have that encourage contemplation and kind of almost like a passivity, right? Like you have to kind of be in this space, kind of not making moves, and you just need to contemplate. But anger is one of those emotions where it is really about action. So, so I was like, I want to honor that. I want to prioritize that, and I want to normalize that. This is absolutely going to come up in your journey. And part of the self-acceptance, part of the ask of the acceptance of the confidence is to say, will you accept me when I'm messy? Will you accept me when I'm mad? Will you accept me in my quote unquote like hardest to love space? And I think giving ourselves that sense of worth, I deserve to be accepted and loved and confident, even when I'm this way, is
Yeah.
very, very, very powerful. So, and then the second thing right after that is a whole section called the brag pages, brag book, which is again another, especially if you're a socialized female, it's another taboo. You are not supposed to brag. You're not supposed to not talk about how great you are. You're not supposed to talk about moments when you did something really rad or had a realization that was really profound and you were proud of yourself. So this is again normalizing, like, you should be able to brag. You should be able to brag with people, the community around you, like, should support you in moments where you feel lit up.
Yes.
And you should be able to hold that space for yourself, and you can hold that space for yourself. And then, so that's just like immediately, I was trying to like take two of the biggest taboos, right? And really lift them up. And bragging, or kind of really being proud of moments when you've accomplished something or made a realization, is also a therapeutic tool. That
Yes.
is something that shows up in cognitive behavioral therapy. So I love how it's kind of like, it's sort of a, it's got a lot of layers to it. And so, and then the book kind of goes from there. It has all these different sections that really focus on different components of this work, and like how to, like, learning how to write a boundary script, learning how to do things like lowering the stakes. Like, for example, when someone's really deep in body dysmorphia, um, they have disproportionately overblown stakes in their head. So like, if I do this, or if I look like this, or if I gain this weight, or if I eat this, then I will blank. And often, like, then I will blank, it's usually like, then I will die. Then everyone will hate me. Then I will, like, eat every single thing in my house. And then I will go to the grocery store and eat every single thing there. Like, often they're not grounded in reality, because a lot of times this trauma comes from childhood.
Mhm.
And a lot of times, usually, if you take it to its logical conclusion, it's, if this happens, I will die. Because again, when you're a kid, being rejected on the basis of your weight is a type of social death. And it's
Yes.
very scary. It's very scary. So I think it's useful to, and then, so we go through in the journal, and it's like, how can you rewrite this? How can you rewrite this so the stakes are actually appropriate to like what's happening right now as an adult you right now. So like those kinds of tools are things that are like, that I really wanted to work with people, and I wanted to create a journal that was vibrant and gorgeous and beautiful and cute, and that really was an invitation for people to see that book if it was on their bookshelf or on their bed, like their nightstand, for them to see it and feel immediately a sense of joy associated with doing this very, in fact, difficult work.
Yeah.
I am so excited personally to get my hands on the journal because, as you said, it's beautiful, and I knew it had those tools within it, but to hear what you've mapped out in it, I love the idea of self-celebration. We talk about it all the time on the podcast, and how we work so hard and celebrate so little. And it is because it's ingrained in us to not be too like braggadocious, when in reality, like, we deserve to be. And I love that you've created a space, one, to be braggadocious, and two, to like go through the moments where you don't feel as great and make it okay to like walk yourself through that and create the boundaries. It just, so much goodness you piled into one book, Virgie. I don't know how you did it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I want to know, before I let you go, one, where we can find your book, your journal, and you in general. Where can we connect with you?
Yes. I would say you can find every single thing on my website, virgietovar.com, VirgieTov as in Victor, AR.com. And on Instagram at Virgie Tovar. I do like, so, I mean, like I have a million things. Like I do travel and books and speakings and trainings and things like that. So you can find all of that on my website.
I absolutely love following you on Instagram. Like I said before, you have obviously such like cool colors that you're wearing, always inspiring, always too sharing like something new that you're doing. As you said, I know you do a lot of writing and speaking, and we can't wait to have you speak at the BodCon. It's going to be awesome. We have just so many great panels planned and panelists planned, and just conversation that's going to be like this today, where yes, we learn something, but we also get to have fun conversation. We get to laugh, we get to cry, all the parts of community that we're looking for, right? I think back to the beginning of our conversation where you said about that conference you went to that really made you feel seen and validated and heard. And that's exactly what it's going to be at the BodCon. So I can't wait to have you there, Virgie. To everyone listening, we can't wait to have you there to join the conversation. As I said before, you can get your tickets if you don't already have them at thebodcon.com. Thank you so much for listening to us. If you're listening to us on Apple or Spotify, be sure to rate and review the podcast. Give us some love there. Also, if you want to see us be so animated and colorful, be sure to check out the podcast on YouTube. We're having a lot of fun there and growing there, so be sure to give us a subscribe. And you can always find us on Instagram at the BodCon, where we're sharing the most up-to-date on our panelists, what's happening at the conference, and just body confidence, self-love things in general. So be sure to connect with us there. We can't wait to hear from you. Virgie, I can't wait to have more conversations with you very soon on March 5th. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, until next time, friends, we'll see you. Thanks so much for joining us today on the BodPod. We release new episodes every week, and we're available on all podcast streaming platforms and now YouTube too. Subscribe to our channels to be the first to know. Want to talk all things body confidence, enter amazing giveaways, and hear updates about the BodCon 2023? Find us on Instagram at the BodCon. My name's Rachel K. Grimm, and I'll see you next week.